For years, people have joked that the Linux desktop was always almost ready for mainstream users. But something very different is happening now, and even longtime Linux users can feel it. The Linux desktop is changing faster than it has in over a decade. New design languages, modern display systems, AI-powered workflows, smoother animations, HDR support, advanced gaming compatibility, touch-friendly interfaces, and unified desktop experiences are all arriving at the same time. What once looked fragmented and outdated is beginning to feel polished, futuristic, and surprisingly competitive against Windows and macOS. And this is not just another cosmetic update. This is the beginning of a desktop revolution. The biggest reason behind this transformation is simple. Linux developers finally realized that performance alone is not enough anymore. For years, Linux focused heavily on power users, customization, terminal workflows, and lightweight efficiency. Those things are still important, but modern users also expect beautiful interfaces, fluid animations, seamless scaling, intuitive layouts, and consistency across devices. They want their desktop operating system to feel modern the moment they boot it up. And now Linux distributions are racing to deliver exactly that. If you look at the latest versions of KDE Plasma, GNOME, Cosmic Desktop, Deepin, Hyprland, and even smaller projects like Budgie and Cinnamon, you can immediately see the difference. Linux desktops no longer look like outdated clones of Windows XP, they are becoming unique identities of their own. KDE Plasma now feels incredibly smooth and professional, almost like a hybrid between Windows 11 and a futuristic productivity environment. GNOME continues pushing its clean minimal design philosophy that many users compare to macOS, while still remaining deeply customizable underneath. And then you have newer environments like Cosmic from System 76, which are being built almost from scratch using modern technologies, focused on performance, flexibility, and design consistency. The timing of all this is interesting because the entire PC industry is also shifting. Windows users are increasingly frustrated with ads inside the operating system, telemetry, forced AI integrations, hardware restrictions, and constant account requirements. Many users feel they no longer fully control their own computers. At the same time, macOS devices are becoming more expensive, less repairable, and heavily locked into Apple's ecosystem. Linux suddenly finds itself in the perfect position. It offers freedom, performance, privacy, and now, finally, a modern user experience that ordinary people can actually enjoy using every day. One of the biggest technological changes driving this revolution is Wayland. For decades, Linux desktops relied on the X11 display server, which was powerful but extremely old and difficult to modernize. X11 came from another era of computing. It was created long before modern gaming, high refresh rate monitors, HDR displays, touchscreen laptops, and advanced graphical effects became common. Developers spent years trying to patch and improve it, but eventually the Linux world accepted that a replacement was necessary. That replacement is Wayland. Wayland is not just a technical upgrade. It changes how Linux desktops feel. Animations become smoother. Multi-monitor setups behave better. Fractional scaling improves dramatically. Touchpad gestures feel more responsive. Input latency decreases. Security improves because applications can no longer spy on each other as easily. And gaming performance in many situations becomes more consistent. While Wayland adoption was slow at first, now almost every major Linux desktop is moving toward it aggressively. Fedora already embraces it heavily. Ubuntu continues improving its support. KDE Plasma 6 was designed with Wayland as a primary focus. GNOME developers treat it as the future. Even Linux Mint, historically cautious about major transitions, is now seriously experimenting with Wayland support. The visual side of Linux is also evolving rapidly. Modern Linux desktops are no longer satisfied with flat, boring designs. Developers are introducing blur effects, adaptive themes, rounded corners, dynamic wallpapers, accent colors, smoother transitions, workspace animations, and advanced compositing effects. These may sound small, but together they completely change the emotional experience of using a computer. Users notice when a system feels alive and responsive. They notice when Windows glides smoothly instead of stuttering. They notice when scaling works correctly on 4K monitors. These details matter more than many developers once believed. KDE Plasma especially has become one of the strongest examples of this evolution. A few years ago, many people saw KDE as bloated or unstable, but recent releases changed that reputation dramatically. Plasma 6 feels polished, efficient, and visually modern. It supports HDR, Wayland improvements, color management, tablet enhancements, and highly customizable workflows while still remaining lightweight compared to Windows 11. Many users switching from Windows are shocked by how smooth and flexible Plasma feels. It can look almost exactly like Windows if you want familiarity, or it can transform into something completely unique. That flexibility is becoming one of Linux's greatest strengths. GNOME, on the other hand, is taking a different approach. Instead of endless customization, GNOME focuses on simplicity and workflow efficiency. The developers want the desktop to feel distraction-free and elegant. Every release introduces cleaner animations, improved touchpad gestures, redesigned quick settings, refined notifications, and better application integration. Critics sometimes complain GNOME removes too many features, but supporters argue that its consistency is exactly why it feels so modern. And honestly, when paired with Wayland and modern hardware, GNOME can feel incredibly smooth. Then there is Cosmic Desktop, one of the most exciting developments in the Linux world right now. System 76 decided not to simply modify GNOME anymore. Instead, they began building their own desktop environment using the Rust programming language. That decision surprised many people because building a desktop environment from scratch is an enormous challenge. But the goal is ambitious. Cosmic aims to create a modern Linux desktop designed specifically for current and future computing needs. Early previews already show tiling capabilities, modern aesthetics, advanced customization, efficient workflows, and a focus on user control. Many Linux enthusiasts believe Cosmic could become one of the most influential desktops of the next generation. Gaming is another reason the Linux desktop revolution is accelerating. A few years ago, gaming on Linux was considered unrealistic for most people. Today that situation looks completely different. Valve changed everything with Proton and the Steam Deck. Suddenly thousands of Windows games became playable on Linux with minimal effort. The Steam Deck itself introduced millions of gamers to a Linux-based gaming experience without them even realizing it at first. And because the Steam Deck uses KDE Plasma underneath, many users accidentally discovered that Linux desktops can actually feel modern and usable. This gaming momentum pushed Linux developers to improve the desktop experience even further. Gamers expect smooth frame pacing, variable refresh rate support, HDR compatibility, game mode optimizations, low latency input, and stable graphics drivers. Linux desktops are adapting quickly because they now have real pressure to compete in areas once dominated entirely by Windows. Artificial intelligence is also beginning to shape the Linux desktop future, but in a very different way compared to commercial operating systems. Instead of forcing cloud-based AI assistants into every corner of the interface, many Linux projects are exploring optional and privacy-focused AI integrations. Because Linux is open source, developers and users can choose exactly how AI tools operate on their systems. Local AI models, offline assistants, developer-focused automation, terminal enhancements, and customizable AI workflows are becoming increasingly popular. This gives Linux a major advantage among privacy-conscious users who want AI functionality without sacrificing control over their personal data. The desktop revolution is not only happening visually. The underlying technologies are improving rapidly too. Pipewire replaced older Linux audio systems and dramatically improved sound handling, especially for Bluetooth devices, professional audio, and screen recording. Flatpak is simplifying software distribution across different Linux distributions. Immutable Linux systems like Fedora, Silverblue, and SteamOS are changing how operating systems handle stability and updates. Atomic updates reduce the risk of broken systems. Containerized applications improve security and compatibility. These backend improvements may not look exciting in screenshots, but they are essential for making Linux feel reliable for ordinary users. Laptop support is improving as well. Historically, Linux struggled with battery life, suspend behavior, fingerprint readers, hybrid graphics, and touchscreen compatibility. But hardware vendors are starting to take Linux more seriously. Companies like Lenovo, Dell, Framework, and System 76 now actively support Linux on many devices. AMD's excellent Linux driver support has also helped enormously. Modern Linux laptops can finally deliver experiences that feel polished instead of experimental. What makes this moment truly special is that Linux is no longer copying Windows or macOS as much as it once did. Linux desktops are starting to innovate independently. Tiling window management is becoming mainstream. Keyboard-driven workflows are more advanced. Workspace management feels smarter. Customization is deeper. power efficiency is improving. Community-driven design experimentation is producing ideas traditional operating systems rarely attempt. Linux is developing its own identity. Hyprland is a perfect example of this new energy. Instead of following conventional desktop paradigms, it focuses on dynamic tiling, fluid animations, highly customizable workflows, and visually impressive effects. Videos of Hyprland setups have exploded across YouTube and social media because they make Linux look futuristic. Younger users especially are attracted to these modern aesthetics. They see Linux not as an outdated nerd operating system, but as something stylish, powerful, and different. Social media has actually played a surprisingly important role in the Linux desktop revolution. Platforms like YouTube, Reddit, and TikTok are full of desktop showcases, customization tutorials, Linux gaming benchmarks, and workflow demonstrations. Content creators are making Linux look exciting. And for the first time, many viewers are discovering Linux through visuals rather than technical discussions. They see beautiful desktop setups before they even learn what a Linux distribution is. That shift matters because appearance influences adoption more than many people admit. Another major factor is community competition. Linux desktop projects constantly inspire each other. When one project introduces smoother animations, others respond. When a new design concept becomes popular, it spreads quickly across distributions. Open source collaboration accelerates innovation in ways closed ecosystems cannot easily replicate. Developers can borrow ideas, improve them, and share changes rapidly. This creates an environment where desktop evolution moves surprisingly fast. Of course, Linux still faces challenges. Application compatibility remains a concern for some professional software. Certain anti-cheat systems still block Linux gamers. Hardware compatibility can occasionally be inconsistent. Some distributions remain confusing for beginners. Fragmentation still exists. But the important difference now is that these problems are shrinking while the user experience improves dramatically. Even software developers are beginning to pay more attention. Many cross-platform applications now support Linux officially. Browsers, creative tools, messaging platforms, streaming software, game launchers, and development environments are more accessible than ever. Web applications also reduce platform dependence because so much modern computing happens inside browsers anyway. The rise of Rust programming language inside Linux development is another fascinating trend. Developers increasingly use Rust for desktop components because it improves memory safety and reliability. Cosmic uses Rust heavily. Parts of the Linux kernel are adopting Rust. New utilities and desktop applications are embracing it too. This could significantly improve long-term stability and security across Linux desktops. There is also growing interest in convergence between desktop and mobile Linux experiences. Projects are experimenting with adaptive interfaces that work across tablets, laptops, handheld gaming PCs, and traditional desktops. The line between device categories is slowly blurring. Linux's flexibility makes it uniquely suited for this future because it can scale across extremely different hardware environments. And then there is the philosophical side of this revolution. Linux desktops are evolving during a time when many users are questioning the future of personal computing itself. People worry about surveillance, subscriptions, locked ecosystems, AI overreach, digital ownership, and repair restrictions. Linux represents something increasingly rare in technology: user control. The desktop revolution is not just about prettier icons or smoother animations. It is about creating computing environments where users remain in charge. That message resonates strongly with the younger generations of developers and tech enthusiasts. Many are tired of platforms that constantly monetize attention, restrict customization, or collect excessive data. Linux offers an alternative vision. A system shaped by communities instead of corporate shareholders. A platform where experimentation is encouraged instead of restricted. Interestingly, even companies that once ignored Linux are now investing heavily in it. Valve relies on Linux for the Steam Deck. Google depends on Linux internally and through Android and Chrome OS foundations. Microsoft contributes to Linux development more than many people realize. Cloud computing runs heavily on Linux infrastructure. AI servers overwhelmingly depend on Linux. The operating system that once seemed niche now quietly powers much of the modern digital world. And as Linux becomes more important behind the scenes, improving the desktop experience suddenly matters more too. Developers want environments that feel modern and productive. Gamers want open systems that perform well. Content creators want stable workflows. Students want free alternatives to expensive ecosystems. The Linux desktop revolution is happening because demand finally exists at multiple levels simultaneously. One of the most exciting things about this moment is that nobody fully knows where it leads. Linux desktop market share is still relatively small compared to Windows, but growth is becoming noticeable. Every year more users try Linux for gaming, development, privacy, or curiosity. And unlike previous years, many of them stay because the experience no longer feels rough around the edges. The next few years could be transformative. Wayland maturation will continue. HDR support will improve. ARM-based Linux laptops may become more common. AI integrations will evolve. New desktop paradigms will appear. Gaming compatibility will expand further. Immutable operating systems could become mainstream. And open-source communities will keep experimenting at a speed traditional operating systems struggle to match. For longtime Linux users, this moment feels almost surreal. After decades of hearing that Linux desktops were too complicated or unattractive, the conversation is finally changing. People are now switching because Linux looks modern, performs well, respects privacy, and offers freedom. The desktop revolution is no longer theoretical. It is happening right now. And perhaps the most important part is this: Linux is not trying to become Windows anymore. It is becoming something entirely different. Something more flexible, more personal, more community-driven, and potentially more innovative than anything the traditional desktop industry expected. The old image of Linux as a difficult operating system for programmers only is fading away. In its place emerges a new generation of desktops that are visually stunning, technologically advanced, and designed for the future of computing. The Linux desktop revolution has begun, and for the first time in many years, it genuinely feels like the future of personal computing might not belong entirely to Microsoft or Apple anymore.